At first glance, for those of you who are tuning in, you may say, why is this all that relevant when it comes to dynasty fantasy football? But not so fast. It's actually more relevant than you think because a lot of the players we're going to be talking about here are marquee names that could be on your dynasty roster. That if they are then cut, we're hoping that they go to a new team. It's not a guarantee, but every year it's not. We don't see it. I shouldn't say every year cuts happen. Some of them are more notable than others. So we're going to be talking about the 10 that we think could be likely based on their contract situation. So the first guy we're going to be talking about here is tight end Cole Kmet. Now, some of you may be saying, like, that's crazy. There's no way that's going to happen. Well, if you look at the contract situation, Cole Kmet has 3 years left on his contract. He has $11.6 million cap hit. But if the Bears were to cut him with a post-June 1st release after June 1st, you're talking about a $10 million savings for the Bears. And we got to remember this. And a new head coach with Ben Johnson. Ryan Poles obviously is there as a general manager, but Poles is there to support the head coach. And we just saw that the Bears took Colston Loveland at number 10 overall. So as a result, Cole Kmet's expendable. So they feel that now there could be some possibility of running 12 personnel and the value of having both, and Cole Kmet could obviously get cut next year. But this could be likely, Joe. What do you think is the likelihood on this?
Are we transitioning back or?
We could probably keep it up for a little longer. What do you think?
Okay, I just wasn't sure.
Yeah. So do you want to go on a scale of 1 to 10 for likelihood, or?
Yeah, I think that 1 to 10 probably works.
All right, so pipe in from there.
Pipe in from there. All right, let me see.
Because I asked you what was the likelihood.
Yeah, no, I know. All right. As far as the likelihood, Steve, I'll go with a 5. I don't know if this is likely. I do understand the cap ramifications and the fact that they did draft Colston Loveland, top 10 in the NFL draft here. But I just wonder if at least for a year, if they'll want to have Cole Kmet on the field. Maybe they do run 12 personnel, but just maybe have Cole Kmet in there, help teach Colston Loveland some things, and as they can kind of slowly work them in, as we know, like at the rookie tight end position, it can take those guys a little bit longer to really acclimate to the offense and produce for fantasy.
Yeah, I think 5 is probably accurate when it comes to Cole Kmet. Is it a likely move? Maybe not. But there's definitely a path as to which Cole Kmet gets cut by the Bears and they get some cap savings. And they, at the end of the day, there's only so many players that could be on the field at a given time. So if they feel that they have big plans for Colston Loveland, and don't forget, they've got Gerald Everett on the roster too. So there's no way that all those guys are going to stay on the roster.
Yeah, no. I would be shocked if Gerald Everett still, lasted. I really think he was just an add-on for the, prior regime and the prior offensive coordinator last year that ended up getting fired there with Shane Waldron. He really had the connection with Gerald Everett. So I'd be surprised if Everett, makes it into the season, on the depth chart there at tight end 3.
All right, Joe. So who is our next player that we think could get cut after June 1st?
Yeah, the next player we're going to go with is tight end Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. So Mark Andrews, he's a guy that I think probably has a higher likelihood than the previous guy we talked about with Cole Kmet. The Baltimore Ravens could save, $9.9 million in savings for a post-June 1st release. And, just all the bad stench that Mark Andrews kind of had with the last year's playoff run. He also had a up and down season for him last year, fantasy wise. Really started slow in the season. I don't think he was fully healthy, but came on at the end, had a hot streak there of the touchdowns, which really kept him fantasy relevant last year. But we've also seen, the interesting part of it is, Isaiah Likely and even a guy like Charlie Kolar, who's third on their depth chart, they got a little bit of run when Mark Andrews really wasn't doing too well and kind of was hurt. Like, I think they've shown kind of enough to say like they could still produce even if they did move on from Mark Andrews here.
Yeah, I think a lot of the conversation around Mark Andrews has been kind of off. You hear what GM Eric DeCosta's come out to say. They haven't really came out and been like, Mark Andrews our guy. We're staying with him. They mentioned about how, not everything is on Mark for the failed 2-point conversion. It was right in his hands. So I think it's definitely a possibility. There was rumors he may get traded. We haven't seen any restructures of his contract or anything like that. They've got guys like Isaiah Likely. They brought in DeAndre Hopkins, who, you may say like, well, DeAndre Hopkins is over the hill. What does it matter? Well, if they're going to run more 3 wide receiver sets, then they may want to have Hopkins, Zay Flowers, and Rashad Bateman. And then the tight end position, maybe they feel Isaiah Likely at this point in his career is a better option than Mark Andrews. So I'm with you. I think it's a 6 or 7. I wouldn't say it's a 10, but I would not be shocked in the least bit if Mark Andrews gets cut.
Yeah, I think the 6 and 7 range is probably good because like I do think it's possible. I could also just see them, sticking Mark Andrews out here for one more year and then, officially moving on for him next season. But I do think there is a possibility of it possibly happening this year. I mean, we've seen Isaiah Likely and what he can do. He brings a little bit extra juice in that, tight end room that Mark Andrews just can't afford to do in his career. But where Mark Andrews is, still kind of savvy is in that red zone area.
Next guy we're going to be talking about here is wide receiver Allen Lazard of the New York Jets. Allen Lazard may not be the most fantasy relevant these days, but on the New York Jets, I would argue that he is. If you look at that depth chart, it's pretty slim pickings. I mean, you've got Garrett Wilson up at the top, but after that, who else do you have? You got guys like Malachi Corley, who has shown some buzz, in limited action and a former higher draft pick. You got Allen Lazard. Who else you really got, Joe? When you look at Allen Lazard, the Aaron Rodgers buddy that keeps getting passed around. The rumblings, maybe does he get traded to a team like Pittsburgh, right, to reunite with possibly Aaron Rodgers if he goes there. Well, if you look at Allen Lazard, if they were to release him after June 1st, they're only saving $676,000. So it's not like it's a huge cap savings if they cut him. I think it's high. I think it could possibly be up to an 8. The only thing is that when it comes to Allen Lazard, is like, again, the wide receiver depth is so poor that maybe they feel like we should keep him.
Yeah, that's where I don't know if this actually I think if anything, he gets traded. I might, put Allen Lazard at a 5 in likelihood that he gets the post-June 1st cut. Just like you said, he doesn't really provide savings, and just the fact, mostly the fact that their depth chart, like you said, is pretty, bare bones. They don't have a lot of receiving options, so maybe they want to have a, more veteran type of player in the room like Allen Lazard, and where I could see him, just sticking around for one more year, even though he was kind of just like, he's like one of those Aaron Rodgers leftover players.
He really is. Joe, who is the next guy we're going to be talking about here?
Yeah, our next guy, we got another tight end, and that's going to be tight end Noah Fant of the Seattle Seahawks. All right, so for Noah Fant here, if the Seahawks were to do a post-June 1st release, they'd have an $8.9 million savings, which is honestly pretty good. But looking at their depth chart here, they got Noah Fant listed as a starter, Elijah Arroyo, who they took in this draft, AJ Barner, who they drafted in last year's draft, who I thought was interesting. He's a good blocker, has some receiving ability. So, if the Seahawks definitely, wanted to take the $8.9 million savings, I feel like they definitely could move on from, Noah Fant. They got a guy in Elijah Arroyo who's really athletic. I know you and I liked him in the pre-draft process just with his burst and different things that he can do. And I think, he could really fit well in that Seattle Seahawks offense, which is really just lacking receiving options. To where Arroyo probably is more exciting than Noah Fant at this point.
Yeah, I think the Elijah Arroyo selection was really what would lead me to believe that Noah Fant could be cut. I think it's relatively high. I'm going to say 5 or 6. Probably not as likely as Andrews. I think he's the most likely of the tight ends we've talked about. I'd say then I would go Fant, and then I'd go Kmet, I think. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he were to get cut, because they could say, hey, we want Arroyo to really step in and be this guy. I mean, what has Fant really done since he's been traded from the Broncos, as we see on your wall there, Joe? He really hasn't done all that much.
Yeah, no, he hasn't. And I just wonder if some of that maybe changes. Well, we'll see. It just seems like Seattle just hasn't involved the tight ends enough in the offense, but maybe it is just, the fact that Noah Fant just really hasn't been that like explosive player and versatile player that everyone kind of thought he was coming out of Iowa. He showed a lot of, acceleration and speed in college, but it just never seemed to really translate here at the NFL level.
The next guy I'm going to be talking about here is quarterback Kirk Cousins of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, if you look at the contract, Joe, the Falcons wouldn't be getting all that much in return if they cut him. In fact, they'd actually lose. If they cut him after June 1st, they actually would, get hit of $10 million. But it'd be breaking up the cap situation because right now, his dead cap for 2025 that he were to be cut would be $50 million. In 2026, it'd be $25 million. Now, there's a possibility people talk about that he may get traded, but he has no trade clause. So, unless Kirk Cousins is willing to waive it, which, maybe he would because he seems like the ultimate competitor. He'd want to be a starter, but, people had thought that Cleveland would be that place. But now they drafted Dylan Gabriel and Stuart Sanders, and they have Kenny Pickett. Oh, and they have Joe Flacco. So it's like they have all these different options. They seem content with Kirk Cousins being the backup there, but is that just smoke? Would they want to, cut him and just have it be Michael Penix, and that's the quarterback room is his, and he moves on, having Kirk Cousins in the shadow, does that change things? I'm not sure. I think it's probably less likely this happens. Maybe the Falcons hope they could trade him maybe in the beginning, in the middle of the season if there's a team that, loses their starter, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on this one, Joe?
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that I'd be surprised if he does get, released, but I do think it's a possibility that he gets traded. And, Kirk Cousins just isn't the guy where I think he'd be a problem in the locker room, or else I'd put the trade or the cut possibility, a lot higher. But it's probably, I would probably put the cut probability at, 3 or 4, because like you said, it really is not going to help from a cap perspective. And, you paid him all that money. And, I think Kirk Cousins could be helpful to a guy like Michael Penix, more so just helping him being another coach on the sideline. And for that reason, that's where I just don't know if it makes sense to cut him. But I definitely think they are going to try to trade him. It's just a question of, at this point, who's going to want to acquire him. Maybe it's the Steelers if they end up striking out on this Aaron Rodgers stuff.
Now that is a likely spot because the Steelers are not just going to want to put Will Howard out there and just.
And I'm almost positive they don't want to put Mason Rudolph out there either.
No, they say they're okay with it.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Yeah, I think Kirk Cousins would definitely be the fallback if that was them.
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, I thought it would be Cleveland, but there's no way now. They doubled up at the rookie quarterback in the draft, Flacco, Pickett. They're just not going to make that move.
All right, Joseph, who's the next guy we got here?
Yeah, the next guy we got is going to be wide receiver Adam Thielen with the Carolina Panthers. And I think this was an interesting scenario for Adam Thielen here, Steve. Just the fact that they could save $8.4 million. Adam Thielen's, 85, approaching the last year in the deal here. They got a couple of void years after this.
He's 85.
What's that?
You said he's 85.
Did I really say he's 85?
Yeah, he's 85.
Oh boy, I did not mean. Sorry, Adam Thielen. Maybe it feels like he's 85, but he's definitely only 35. This is, he's approaching age 35 this year. And like I said, they can save $8.4 million, which is a decent amount of savings. And they've added some guys to the wide receiver room. Obviously, they drafted Ted McMillan. They have Xavier Legette already. Brought in Hunter Renfrow, Jalen Coker, who they drafted last year. And there's honestly been a lot of buzz in this rookie minicamp for Jimmy Horn Jr. out of Colorado as well. Be interesting to see what impact he could make on the team as well.
They got a bevy of wide receiver options in Carolina, and because they can save the amount of money that they can with Thielen, I think it's likely. The thing is, I think Thielen has a good rapport with Bryce Young and with the organization. Right. So that's where I feel like from his veteran leadership standpoint, they may want him to stay there, but I don't know. With Ted McMillan being there and Horn, they're going to want both those guys to make the roster, like you said. And Hunter Renfrow, I don't even know why he wasn't even able to get a job in the league last year. And he was
because he wasn't healthy.
He wasn't?
No, he said he had lost a ton of weight because he had what is it? It's something to do with the digestive system. I forgetting the term. But he actually had like
Colitis? Is it
it's it's
colitis?
it's something. It's not colitis, but it's
Hmm.
something where the gluten bothers him, things like that. It's I'm like I said, I'm blanking on the general like medical term, but that's why he was sick. He had lost a bunch of weight,
Interesting.
but now he's come back and he's ready to play. And honestly, like if Hunter Renfrow is back to the level that he was with the Raiders, like he does very similar things to Adam Thielen, and is also kind of a good route runner and an extra guy on the field that could be a veteran leader too if they did want to get younger wide receiver and release Adam Thielen and take the savings.
Absolutely. So next guy I'm going to be talking about here is wide receiver Jakobi Meyers of the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the reason why this may not happen is based on the depth of the Raiders receiver room. But he's going into his final year with the Raiders. You got to remember this is a new front office. You're talking about Pete Carroll coming in as the head coach, John Spidek as the general manager. So they don't have any ties to Jakobi Meyers other than maybe Tom Brady as a partial owner having familiarity with Myers. And Myers had a great year, so not any knock against him, but if they decided to cut him after June 1st, the Raiders saved $10.9 million in cap space, which is quite a bit. They could use that to roll over eventually or for other moves. So, as to how likely it is, I'm not sure. Like I said, because of the receiver room, probably more towards a 3 or 4, but it's not crazy.
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy. But I agree. I think it's definitely under a 5, just because they just don't have a lot of depth there, and he's really the wide receiver one on the team. To where that's the only thing that makes me think it's unlikely to happen is because they really need Jakobi Meyers, and they're going to need to have a guy like him, and he helps a guy like Brock Bowers, at tight end as well.
All right, Joe. So who is the next guy we're going to be talking about here?
Yeah, next guy is going to be wide receiver Kendrick Bourne of the New England Patriots. And yeah, I could definitely see this one happening. Talking about, guy Kendrick Bourne, veteran receiver. He's approaching, age 30 here at this season. The Patriots can, save $6.3 million if they were to cut him post June 1st. And you want to talk about a crowded receiving room, that is the New England Patriots. I mean, they got added Stephon Diggs, got Demario Douglas, drafted Kyle Williams, have Kayshon Boutte, brought in Matt Collins as well, drafted, Jalen Polk and Javon Baker last year as well. So there's just a bevy of really young talent. And with that, I could see them moving on from a guy like Kendrick Bourne here.
Yeah, I mean, look at it. Mike Vrabel came in as the head coach. Josh McDaniels now as the offensive coordinator. Actually, I don't think McDaniels was. No, he's been out in the league for a while. I was gonna say, did McDaniels have any crossover with Bourne? I don't think so. But even if he did, like you said, that receiver room is so it's deep, man. I mean, like you said, man, you got Diggs is definitely going to make the roster. Kyle Williams is definitely going to make the roster. Then you've got guys like Polk and Baker, who you would think, they've shown some flashes. They sign a guy also like Matt Collins, who's a special teams guy. It's like, okay, how many more options do we really have for Kendrick Bourne to make the roster? Not to mention he's dealt with a lot of injuries. So Pats save a lot of money. This could be a 9 or 10, Joe. I think he could be definitely cut.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this one is probably one of the most likely ones that we've talked about. So I think the 9 or a 10 is probably appropriate for Bourne here.
Next guy I'm going to be talking about here is running back Zack Moss of the Cincinnati Bengals. If you look at the contract, the Bengals wouldn't be saving too much money. They would save $2.7 million in cap space. Zack Moss is 28 years old, but let's not forget he went on IR last year due to a neck injury. We didn't see him come back, and after that happened, Chase Brown just took off like a rocket. So, do I really, it really could depend on Zack Moss' health, but they also drafted Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech, I believe in the 6th or 7th round. So, I think that Moss is expendable at this point, and with all the cap issues that the Bengals have, I could very much see that Zack Moss. I mean, maybe they're trying to get this Trey Hendrickson deal done any penny that they can save. they could maybe use for Trey Hendrickson. So I think Zack Moss. I'd say about 7 or 8, Joe.
Yeah, I think seven is good here. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think they had Zack Moss as insurance for Chase Brown, but Chase Brown really showed that he could carry the workload and be the RB1 for the offense. And then, like you said, they also have Taj Brooks, who they added there, who could be an interesting mix in on first and second downs there, which would kind of be what they would have Zack Moss for. So if they want to go younger, save some money, Zack Moss, could be an option for them to release.
All right, Joe, who is our last player? We got 10 guys we talked about. Who is it?
Yeah, our final player is going to be running back Austin Ekeler with the Washington Commanders. Another older guy heading into his age 30 season here. Commanders can save $3.4 million if they decide to release him post June 1st. And I don't know. I do think it's interesting for the bit of a cap savings, but just with the Commanders, looking to really compete and, honestly, challenge the Philadelphia Eagles to possibly win the NFC East here. I think it makes sense for them to keep them. But if you look at their, depth chart is another reason, Brian Robinson Jr. is there. That shows Jeremy McNichols. I still think that they've got Chris Rodriguez Jr. as well. So just with those, kind of guys, and they don't have as, crazy depth there, a lot of notable names. I think Ekeler probably stays.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I don't think that Austin Ekeler is going to be moved here. I think it's possible. Are there any free agent running backs that I'm not thinking about that could possibly be out there that they could sign instead if they with the cap savings?
The most notable one out there, you got Nick Chubb and J.K. Dobbins. I think those are probably the two notable guys.
Those are the ones. Well, and those guys are waiting until after June 1st. So that would be interesting, but neither of them are receiving backs. I think Chubb ends up going to Chicago from what it sounds like.
That's the hottest rumor.
Dobbins, I forgot. I heard something that was it Texans or something like that possibly for Dobbins. I don't know, but that would be interesting if Dobbins went to Washington, but I don't. Like I said, he doesn't really fit the Ekeler role that he plays as a pass catcher.
That's it. That's the thing right now. Anyways, before teams, make these post June 1st cuts and adjust their rosters, even around training camp time, there's nobody out there that I feel like would fit that receiving role that Austin Ekeler currently has. That's why I think he's safe for now. But maybe if somebody does hit the market, maybe they would want to kind of try to exchange those guys.